Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. I want to give you a heads up. We did have some Wi-Fi issues during the recording of this interview, so at a few points the video freezes up a little bit and the audio starts to cut out, but it's just a few times. We're going to fix this as we go forward and record future episodes. Without further ado, enjoy the interview. Okay, well, everyone, thank you for tuning in if you're watching this. My name is Colin. I'm a personal trainer working in the Northern California area. And I wanted to do this video to discuss the topic of nutrition. Nutrition is really a touchy subject when it comes to fitness and health. And as a trainer, it's not something that I can really go into a whole lot of depth on. I'm not a subject matter expert in this area. But when I first came into the fitness industry, I met Abby Chan. Abby is the second registered dietitian that I ever worked with. The first one was while I was in the military. I spent some time in special operations, and we had a sports dietitian assigned to us, and it was a luxury to have that. But when I started transitioning into the fitness space, you don't realize how few people have access to a registered dietitian or are even aware of what an RD does or does not do and how they can help in terms of navigating the complexities that come about when it comes to learning about food and the nuances that are there. So, Abby, thank you for doing this. For anyone that doesn't know, I guess to start off, what is a registered dietitian?
Good question. So, a registered dietitian is someone who either has at least a bachelor's degree in nutrition and dietetics and goes through a very specific program, and also has to then do at least a 9 month internship where you're actually working in the field under other dietitians. A master's degree, it's now been shifted into a master's degree requirement, and I have mixed feelings about that, but it's totally other topic. But I think that's the hard thing because we are RDs and our credential is RD or RDN. So RDN means registered dietitian nutritionist. And that changed, I don't even know, probably like 10 years ago, where from just RD. And so now I think there's a lot of confusion of what's a nutritionist versus what's a dietitian. And I would say that if you are working with anyone who calls them just a nutritionist, they're likely someone who has either just done a certificate. Some of them can be great and well-rounded, especially if things aren't super specific. But if you're looking for specific, either nutrition for a certain specific like disease process or chronic illness, or if you are working in sports specifically and want some information around that, I would definitely say if you're looking for anything specific, working with a dietitian is very essential.
So when it comes to working with a dietitian, I mean, I, a lot of times going back to what you said with the nutritionist versus a registered dietitian, one being certification and one being this lengthy process. To take a bigger view of this, what led you to this career field in the first place?
Great question. I didn't even know a dietitian was an option when I was younger. I went through high school, was a competitive dancer for a very long time, and even struggled with my own relationship to food and eating disorder, and was injured all of the time. I remember just like sleeping on the dance studio floor because I was so anemic and so tired and had stress fractures and all the other things. So, really there. And freshman year, I started off doing my undergrad in business communications because what do you do when you don't know what you want to do, but you have to go to school because of family pressure and things like that, and Chinese, and not was for me. And in unfortunate circumstances, but also, I'm grateful in some ways. After my freshman year, my brother passed away. And so it gave me some time to really just dial back and tune into like, what do I want to do? I don't want to work in business communications. Granted, I own a business now. But it made me really start to see what was important to me. What did I actually enjoy and how could I actually start to make a difference? And because of my lived experience with being an athlete and also severely disordered, I wanted to do whatever I could to prevent other people from going down that path.
So it sounds like it came from where did you even know what a registered dietitian was when you were first getting into the nutrition side of things, or was that something that just kind of happened organically, just finding that path, I guess.
Yeah, so I left after my freshman year and then for a bit and I was like, well, I know I need to take science classes at some point for whatever I end up doing, so I might as well just knock them out at a community college. So I did that and I took a nutrition class. It was Nutrition 101. And that was when I realized that, so I started to dive into that. I sought out some local dietitians, kind of got an idea, like, spent time shadowing them, and then totally shifted my major. And that was actually a really good question that my school counselor asked me. Do you have to dietitian? Because if you have to be a dietitian, then here's the process, here's the pathway that you have to go through. It's internships, and there's getting into that internship after you graduate and have your degree to actually get your credential. Well, you have to finish your internship, take a test, then you get your credential. And so it's a very specific pathway. And he was like, do you really have to be specific about nutrition, or would you rather work in a public health setting or know a lot about nutrition but not work on that individual patient client relationship? And he's like, and if so, that's way easier. There's still a lot of nutrition degrees that you can do that are still great, working in a public health sector, working in even like government related things, which can be awesome. But for me, I knew that I didn't want that, and I wanted to be able to work with people one on one. And so when people are like, well, why would I do this? Right? I'm like, well, if you have a nurse, it's the same process where you are shadowing under people, you have a degree, you have a national exam that you have to take. Oftentimes you have state licensure exams that you also have to take. And so if people are asking, why would I do that versus just nutritionist? I'm asking also, if you're in the hospital, would you rather have anyone who just had maybe a 10-day certificate or a 2-day nutrition course to be taking care of you? Or would you rather have a registered nurse and a doctor and all of these other people that really have not only the training, but the education, the skills, who have dedicated their lives to this? And that's how I kind of lay it out.
So within the RD kind of space, it sounds like it's a big part of it is the clinical side, working in a hospital setting. Is it fair to say that the transition from that being in a clinical setting, did it start with the clinical setting for RDs, or did it start in the sport world, or which one came first?
Yeah, so quick started actually in a pretty female dominated career path. And so it started professionalized in the early 1900s, professionalized homemaking. That's how it started. So, yeah, so from cooking, there's a big part of our training that goes into how do you manage basically a commercial kitchen. So there's a lot around cooking. There's questions on our exam of when would you use baking soda versus baking powder. Like, it's so vast, and there's so many different places and sectors that you can work in as a dietitian. So one is definitely clinical. So where you're working in a hospital setting, I did that for over 2.5 years, where I was clinically working in the intensive care unit, managing tube feedings for people who can't eat through their mouth for whatever reason, or TPNs, where we can't even use their gastrointestinal tract. We have to give them IV nutrition. So that was a lot of what we did. And so you can work clinically. You can also work still clinically, not in a hospital, like a dialysis center, or be a diabetes educator, things like that. And then there's a public health setting where you're working a little bit more on some of the big policies. Even when we look at, the updated guidelines every year in the US for, uh, Healthy Americans like 2020, whatever that is, there's dietitians that are in the background that are really pushing a lot of that legislation forward. And then, so you can work in a government sector, you can also work in just public health. So community public health centers have dietitians that are overseeing breastfeeding programs, women's, infants, and children, SNAP benefits, so whole realm. You can also work in a, commercial kitchen. And especially in hospitals or any sort of rehab clinic, everyone needs to have a dietitian on board overseeing menus, overseeing nutritional counts and all of that. And then you can work in outpatient. So that's what I do. And I've chosen to work specifically with eating disorders and then athletes. So I would say definitely athletics have come second, or kind of the last thing that's really interesting in the nutrition world. I knew I always wanted to work with athletes. And I didn't really know what I wanted that to look like exactly. But it was really, I would say, in the last 10 years that we've started to see, perfect like collegiate teams, the NFL, the NHL, and like all of these professional sports teams utilizing dietitians to be an integral part of their team. And so from that professional setting, that's great and that's awesome, but there are so many recreational athletes that want to do well because they love their sport, because it's fun, because it gives them a sense of community, and because there's that underlying aspect of nutrition that typically isn't addressed. That's when I start to see a lot of athletes' wheels fall off. Like people have running coaches, people have strength coaches, and they're doing all these things. But I'm like, has anyone looked at your nutrition? Like, are you actually getting enough? And if not, then I think that's a big red flag. And so whether you're an athlete or not, even if you just intentionally move your body, even if you don't identify as an athlete, if you're someone who enjoys going to the gym a few times a week, but you're really busy, or you have a disordered relationship to food, and we'll probably talk about what that means a little bit, then I find that, we're not taking care of our bodies in the way that we should. And we really need to start to unpack some of those things.
So going into some of those things, when it comes to working with people that are they're into movement recreationally, whether they're into fitness or they have a physical hobby that they do on the weekends or throughout the week, or they're an athlete, are there any common topics or misunderstandings or myths that you see come up that you get asked about a lot, that you hear conversations about when you're just out and about or anything like that?
There's so many common myths, and because of the nature of my work, we own a gym, and it is a what we call like an anti-diet. It's a weight inclusive gym, so it's meeting people wherever they're at. We aren't intentionally trying to shrink people's bodies or do weight loss challenges, because we are also all of our providers, from our physical therapists to our strength coaches to our acupuncturists to us dietitians, we're zooming out and looking at the big picture and not looking at what is happening right now. So I think one, I guess, overarching some like aspect of misinformation or myth that even comes up is that I need to do this right now. And it's this very myopic view of, I want to either get to this race, or I want to lose X amount of pounds, or I want to do this. And I'm like, okay, fine, we can talk about that. And I want to also look at, what are you doing when you're 75? What do you want to be doing when you're 80? And how do we start to then dissect that from what you want right now and see how is that maybe going to possibly negatively impact you to this bigger, larger goal when you're older. And I think especially around weight loss, that's one of them. People are like, I want to lose X amount of pounds by this date, or by a wedding, or by whatever it is. And I'm like, okay, let's think about that. And let's kind of look at, what does your relationship to food look like? If people are persistently dieting, whether it be referred to as yo-yo dieting, cyclic dieting, pathological dieting, there's a few different terms for it, all the same, but kind of like that very binary approach of either I'm in it and I'm totally on it, or I'm not doing anything. When we end up doing that, that actually does negatively impact our overall physical health pretty in depth, but it also is going to start to whittle away our overall mental and emotional health as well. So I like to zoom out from that picture. And I think a lot of people don't really have the words or the verbiage around what they're looking for, because we have always equated health in sports, in medicine, in everything. We have very, very weight biased research. And it's just looking at that verbiage. People tell me, I want to lose weight. And I'm like, okay, why? I'm like, well, I want to have more energy. I want to be able to keep up with my kids. I want to be able to like do X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, we can do all of those things actually probably without even losing weight. Like, we can do those behaviors and things to get to that space right now, because I have no idea what your body's going to do. It's a very common misconception of like even just the law of thermodynamics of calories in and calories out. I'm like, yeah, if we zoom out from a very, very moon perspective, theoretically, but we need to understand that hormones are going to be the thing that rule our entire body and rule how our body's processing food, what our metabolism is like. And if we are looking at it that way we can understand that it's not just calories in and calories out. It's really how do we support our overall hormones? How do we support our bone health, muscular health, so that we can start to really just live that life that you're looking for, whatever that is. So people don't have the words to say, I want to change all these things. It's just, I want to lose weight and then this will happen. And I'm like, we can skip that step and maybe your body will change, but maybe it won't.
Yeah, and especially going back to that, it's such a there's so much nuance there, right? It's no one's going to be exactly the same as, this group versus that group, this person this is versus that person. Their experiences are completely different. One of the things that I didn't really understand until I started working for you and for Brian at Evolve, that was my first job coming out of the military, and it was my first job in the fitness industry, was how common it is to run into people who are getting into going after a fitness goal and they won't eat, they'll stop eating. And you start to notice, at least from what I've seen over the past few years, is that it gets harder to show up to train. When you do show up, it's just a drag and you're just barely getting through it. And on top of that, the rest of your day is just getting honestly beaten down. You have less focus, less energy, and it starts to wear on people over and over again. And so when I hear, well, I need to start tracking my calories and it's just a numbers game, I start to have questions. And so when you hear that, going back to the calories thing, would you advise someone to take a step back? What's the first question you would ask that person who's saying, well, I just need to start weighing my food or counting calories?
Yeah, I think always people are like, I want to eat better. Do I need to track? And I'm like, well, you can eat better if you're not eating enough. So we need to start there. We need to start at some of the basics, of do you at least get 3 meals a day? And we can split that up. 3 meals isn't a magic number. If you work, normally that's the only way to fit things in your schedule because you have a lunch hour and whatnot. But that can be 3 to 5 meals in. And we need to look at, are you just getting enough throughout the day? Then, if we can kind of check that box, we get to level up. We get to go to level two, where we're then looking at, okay, we're eating enough. And I think even under that, there's like, do you have access to food? Do you have time to cook? Do you have the skills to cook? Do you have, can you afford food? Like, there's so many things that even live under that frequency aspect, And so if we can go through level one where I have access to food, we can then go to level two of, okay, I'm eating frequently enough. And then we can move into that level three space where it's maybe paying more attention to not just calories, because you can easily eat, 2,500 calories in just donuts. And that's fine, but we're probably missing out on other nutrients, probably maybe not going to make you feel that good. And so it's more so taking an additive approach of how can we add in, more protein, more fiber, more carbohydrates, and adding in all these different things that help really give you not only a variety of calories and macronutrients, meaning carbs, protein, and fat, but also those nutrients, and doing that without the exclusion of donuts and cookies and chips and things that also bring you joy, right? Every single person that is walking into my office is going to have a very different experience with food, right? So say it's someone who has maybe had food insecurity in the past. Maybe they're food secure now, but have had food insecurity in the past where food wasn't always reliable. And then they've maybe struggled with disordered eating or all of that, and maybe they come from an immigrant household. All of these things are going to impact their relationship to food. And then we can throw in, their caregivers and whoever raised them. All of those individuals have their own relationship to food that has been passed down generationally as well. And so every single person is going to be so different in that way. And so we need to not just have this very specific calorie macro plan, because if I have someone who's walking in from, like you, from a military standpoint, where it's like, okay, food was definitely function for you. It was like, okay, I have this, I need to do this. This is how it is. It's a little bit more mechanical in that way. And it's when you're in an intense training phase, it's just like, how do I eat enough? So I find that a lot of times it's more so the aspect at that point of how do we, with that athlete, get out of just that mechanical space and maybe bring in a little bit more of this like softer aspects of food of like, why you're eating, what you enjoy eating. And then if it's someone who's just in that place where they kind of do have a very disordered relationship to it or haven't had the ability to be set up in a kind of healthful space, maybe it's taking some of their behaviors and trying to find like that meeting point in between how do we get enough, and also how do we build in the cultural things that are important to you, your family life structure, your work life structure, your training structure, because it's so much more than just, again, a numbers game.
Yeah, and it sounds like it really comes down to as far as nutrition advice, this is very much a case by case sort of thing where there are all these different factors that most people I don't think are even thinking about when they step back and go, why do I look at food this way? And then thinking about all the different messaging that we get hit with on a daily basis about food, about what's quote unquote good or bad, or what you should or shouldn't eat, or there are diets that say you shouldn't eat at all between certain time windows and just all these different things. And now with social media, people are getting bombarded with this stuff constantly. So it's such a nuanced conversation around, okay, where are we starting from, and how do we feel about this, and where did we come from, and where do we want to go? So I think this is a great place to end this, and I think we should have a part two. I want to go deeper into a lot of the things that we hit on today, as far as those conversations, the conversations around the relationship with food, around what does it mean to look at it from just a mechanical standpoint versus the softer side, as you said, of just, hey, intuitively, how do I feel about this? How does my body feel with this? Why am I going for this versus that? And where did this idea around this type of food come from? So, Abby, for anyone that doesn't know you, if you would like to be found, whether it's online, social media, something like that, where can people find you if you would like to be found?
Yeah, you can find me at Abby the RD on Instagram. I kind of hang out on TikTok, but not a whole ton. It rots my brain, so Instagram's like a just easier place for me to engage. You can also find me on my website, which is evolveflg.com. And yeah, I think this is a huge conversation that we need to be having because, especially from a fitness space and gym space, it's very much of that grit mentality where like harder is better all the time. And it's like, okay, that doesn't work. And we've actually known that doesn't work from a calorie perspective and science perspective for a very long time, since even before the 1950s, we knew that diets didn't work. And yet people are still pouring their time, their energy, all of their money, and all of their mental space into it. And increasingly getting more and more defeated every single time. So I think it's a huge conversation. I could talk about this, as you know, I do this all day, every day, but I could talk about this for hours, and all of the different nuances and kind of storylines of it all. But yeah, it's fascinating. So thanks for having me.
Now we're making this a series. All right. Well, thank you, Abby.
Yeah, you're welcome.